Love at First Sight. Chapter 3. I heard a loud groan, followed by a prolonged moan. Then there was a liquid sound. Maddie was lying on one of the expensive outdoor couches, with her arm over her eyes and the other resting on her side. Her little black dress was pulled up and the top rolled down while her lover occupied her. Her powerful legs wrapped around Mr. Chad, and she wriggled on the couch cushions. She was almost crying with need. She shouted again and again, "That's it! That feels so good!" Then she started kicking furiously. As I quickly made my way back the way I had come, I heard a loud "ah" from her partner and a tempestuous "oh yes" from herself. I guess I should have seen it coming. She really was too far away from me, but still, the pain was unimaginable. Death would have been far preferable for me. I must have looked the way I felt when I returned to this godforsaken ballroom. Mary hurried over to me, concerned. Maddie had only been gone for about 30 minutes, but she was already organizing her own search party. I said with utter defeat in my voice, "They're over there in the gazebo." She rushed out the door in a panic, bringing 2 of the friendlier men with her. I had no idea what I was going to do next. With any other woman before Maddie, I would have just packed up, left in a rental car, and never looked back. But of course, there was Billy. He was a major complication. It was exactly what I was afraid of. And it was exactly what I wanted to avoid at all costs. I couldn't suddenly take Billy away in the middle of the night without serious emotional repercussions. So I had to talk Maddie into somehow sending us off like nothing had happened. She owed it to both of us. I don't run away from fights, never have, and never will. I walked away from this disgusting encounter earlier because I didn't want to disrupt Maddie's special moment with this asshole. I wasn't going to be the weenie begging my woman to tell me why. The reasons were painfully obvious. She had finally reunited with her former lover. I thought, her parents are behind this. They must have set the whole thing up, and Maddie must have enlisted her friends to keep me busy while they strengthened their bond. It seemed to me that it would take a lot of effort to get rid of me. I thought I was too easy to get rid of. I needed to meet with her and make arrangements before we both dealt with Billy. I thought, what the hell? If those 3 are going there, I might as well go with them too. We need to get this over with as soon as possible. So I followed the 3 of them to the scene of the crime. I was catching up with them when I heard Mary gasp and wail, "Oh!" I ran the last few yards. Dickface is gone. Probably bragging about his exploits at the party by now. Maddie was lying where I'd last seen her. Her hand was still covered. Only now her feet were on the floor. She was completely out of it. Mary rushed to her in a frenzy and screamed, "Maddie, wake up, what happened?" It was too obvious what had happened, but Mary wanted an explanation. I got the impression that she and Millie really liked me, and that she knew what this little skit meant for our future. Her 2 male friends looked completely embarrassed. Mary closed Maddie's legs and began to bring her to a sitting position. They moved forward to help. One of them turned to me and said with genuine sympathy in his voice, "I'm sorry." I was comforted by the fact that some of them weren't jerks. I was really sorry. As they struggled to get her to her feet, I walked sadly back to the house. Maddie was so out of it that I knew we'd have to wait until morning to talk. However, I wasn't set on whipped dog mode. I planned on chipping my first piece off the face. In my humble opinion, the worst enemy you can make these days is the super hacker. Unfortunately for Chad, that's exactly what I am. And he had a lot of sins to atone for. The amazing aspect of my art is how little time it takes for very bad things to start happening to the person I'm targeting. He was standing with a group of laughing buddies just outside the patio entrance. They were watching a clip he had recorded on his phone. I heard a faint female voice shouting, "That's it! That feels so good," from the phone, and they all laughed loudly. It didn't cost me a thing to scan his port and throw the usual malware on his phone via Bluetooth receiver. His data plan would suffer, but I didn't care. I owned him now. I sent the clip they were watching to his wife and everyone else in his extensive contact list. The message line said, "Look who I just finished making." I put high priority on that message. I didn't want anyone to miss it. This little prank took me almost 2 minutes of furiously typing on my smartphone as I walked across the patio. The thought of Chad explaining this to his wife, friends, parents, and hopefully his boss and priest satisfied my thirst for revenge for a while. But I was sure his overprivileged life would turn to absolute crap once I got to my real gear at home. There were many worse things I could have done to him, and they were all going to happen. I walked over to the group and put my hand on his shoulder. He turned around aggressively, like he thought we were going to fight. I looked back at him with a wicked grin on my face. He grinned and said, "I've always said Maddie is the best ass I've ever had. She was really hot today. It was just like old times. Maybe I'll do her tomorrow." I said very gently, with feigned compassion, "When bad things start happening to you, please think of me, and I want you to remember that you brought this on yourself." Then I patted him sympathetically on the shoulder and walked away. He said something to his buddies as I walked up the stairs to my room. They all laughed out loud again. His cell phone rang. I smiled bitterly to myself. I walked into our room. Billy was asleep in his sleeping bag at the foot of our double bed. He was an innocent angel hugging a ratty teddy bear. Losing Maddie would be a disaster for him. Screw it. It was devastating to me. I finally had to admit that at the ripe old age of 34, I had finally joined the human race. The excruciating pain was a new sensation for a man working nowhere. The agony and injustice of it all just overwhelmed me. My heart was breaking and I cried at the loss. It felt like the end of the world. In many ways it was for me. I didn't want Billy to hear me, so I lay face forward on the bed, my head buried in the pillow. I was sobbing when I felt the door open, and Mary and Millie quietly enter the room. They were supporting the nearly unconscious Maddie, who lay between them with her hands on their shoulders, looking like a wounded warrior. Before she could realize what I was doing, Mary asked with a laugh in her voice, "What did you do with Chad? He was having some kind of intense argument with his wife on the phone. And then he rushed out of here like the devil was chasing him?" I knew he wasn't going anywhere by airplane, because I added him to the federal list, the TSA no-fly list, and CAPS too, as I sadly walked up the stairs and into my room. I sat up and looked at her, my eyes brimming with tears. I snorted and said, "You're right, but he hasn't seen anything yet." Both Millie and Maddie realized what I was doing. Their faces turned white with shock and fear. Mary understood. She said with misery in her voice, "You must give her a chance to explain. I'm begging you." I said, "I don't think there is any explanation for what I saw. I'm done with her. I knew this was going to happen, and I did it anyway. I can't believe I took my little boy's feelings so lightly. When she sobers up, tell her that the only thing I'm going to give her is the opportunity to help me deal with Billy's pain. You have to convince her that she has to make it up to Billy, or what's about to happen to her friend Chad will seem like a fun day in the park. And if there are any long-term implications for Billy, I'll add your parents to my special little project, since I'm sure they have something to do with it too. You can leave her here. I'll find another room for Billy and me to sleep in." They tossed Maddie onto the bed. She sighed and curled up in a ball. She was still wearing the little black dress, but at least it was pulled up. She rolled over onto her back. Then she began to snore. Meanwhile, I picked up Billy, sleeping bag and all. He struggled a little, and then fell asleep in my arms again. Mary stayed in the room to tuck Maddie under the covers. Millie followed me out into the hallway and into the empty bedroom across the hall from ours. She clasped her hands together mournfully. She fell to her knees in a pleading gesture. "Maddie really loves you. She will die if you leave her. You have to talk to her about this." I said, "What is there to say about Millie?" I saw her engaging in lewd behavior with her childhood sweetheart, and she seemed to enjoy it immensely. She can claim she was drunk, but the effect is still the same. It took her 3 hours to forget about me. Millie began to cry. She said, "Please, I'm begging you. There has to be some other explanation. After what he did to her in college, she hated the guy. He'd be the last person in the world she'd ever mess with. I don't know what happened, but you have to give her a chance to explain." I smiled at Millie and said with genuine affection in my voice, "You are a good sister, but what I saw cannot be explained in any other way than the obvious way. Billy and I will be out of your life forever tomorrow as early as possible. I'm going to tell him that Maddie is having so much fun here with her sisters that she's decided to stay for a while. He won't like it, but he'll buy that explanation if Maddie backs it up. Then I'll hope he forgets who Maddie is. I know that won't happen, but she can work with me so he doesn't feel abandoned. if she refuses to do it, or will play games to get me to forgive her, I'm going to expand the offense to include all of you. It's not a threat. It's just something that needs to happen. Now please go away. I don't want Billy waking up in the middle of my argument with you." She looked completely confused. She wasn't the only one. She turned and closed the door. Anger was written all over her face. I put my sleeping angel back on the floor. I climbed into bed and turned off the light. I thought it would be impossible to sleep. I wouldn't call it sleep, but I collapsed instantly. Full system shock has that effect on a person. My dreams were filled with a deeper sense of sadness and desolation than I could bear, but at least I stopped thinking about my bleak future for a while. When you've been a parent for as many years as I have, a baby waking up is like an alarm clock, and Billy started to move. The sun was streaming through the windows. It would have been a beautiful day if it hadn't been for the events of the previous night. I haven't had the happiest of dreams, but on this day, the transition from sleep to wakefulness was the most unpleasant experience of my life. Reality came crashing down on me like a rabid NFL linebacker, and there was nothing but hopelessness and despair ahead of me. Billy was still coming around slowly, so I peed in the bathroom, brushed my hair and teeth, and pulled on a t-shirt and jeans before going back to him. Now I was ready to deal with everything. Billy looked at me with his bright blue eyes. He asked, puzzled, "Where's Maddie?" His reminder of our loss caused a brief throbbing in my head that nearly knocked me out. But I had to hide it. You can do these super hard things for your child. I lied ingenuously. Oh, she was so happy to see her sisters that she wanted to spend the night with them. I know you'll want to do that with little Chelsea when she's older. Now how about breakfast? Millie can't wait to play with you. He smiled his beautiful, boyish smile and said quite sincerely, "I love Aunt Millie." I said, "She loves you too. Today she wants to take you to the University Museum. There are actually dinosaur skeletons there. You can see them." His eyes widened and he said, "Really?" with quiet awe. I laughed with love for my little nerd. My life will always have meaning as long as I have Billy. I brushed his hair and dressed him in shorts and an alligator polo shirt. He put on his miniature slippers. He fit into this new preppy universe much better than his daddy did. We went out into the hallway. Maddie's door was closed. Mary was sitting in a chair by our door, reading her Kindle. She looked like she had been sent there. She was very nervous. I didn't blame her. She must have been waiting for Billy and me to get up. I threw a warning glance at her and said cheerfully, "There's Mary. She can't wait to take us out to breakfast. Maddie will be here as soon as she wakes up. She had a lot of fun last night, and I know she should be a lot more sleepy than we are." Mary caught the gist of it. She said, "Oh yes, Maddie had such a good time last night that she was very tired. That's why she wanted to sleep a little longer." I said, "I told Billy about Millie's plans to take him to the dinosaurs." Mary looked puzzled. I said softly, but with significance, "Don't you remember what we discussed last night? Millie told me that there were real dinosaur skeletons in the museum, and that she wanted to take Billy away for the day to look at them, while Maddie and I discussed how much fun she had last night." Mary understood. She said with contrived cheerfulness, "Oh yes, how could I have forgotten that? Millie is sitting downstairs at breakfast waiting for you. Why don't you two go down there? I was just about to wake Maddie up." Billy said, "I thought she was sleeping with her sisters?" I got an electric shock. He was too perceptive for a 4-year-old. "This isn't going to be easy." I said, "Yeah, but her sisters woke up before her. They didn't have as much fun as she did." There wasn't an ounce of sarcasm in my voice. I grabbed him and said, "I feel a tickle attack coming on." He squealed with delight, and I ran down the stairs, wrapping my arms around him with a deadly tickle as he giggled ferociously. Millie was waiting at the foot of the stairs. There was a huge grin on her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was misery in them, I said, continuing to portray a cheerful mood. "Here's Millie. She's taking you to the museum for the day." Billy jumped out of my embrace and ran to her. He hugged her gingerly around the waist. She kissed the top of his head. Then she leaned over to talk to him, and he kissed her cheek. Billy announced, "I love Millie as much as I love Maddie." Thank God he didn't see Millie's anguished look and the way her eyes clouded over. Millie said, "Let's feed you two," and led us into the dining room. It wasn't exactly baronial, but it was close to it. There was a buffet on the side table, served in crockery, just like a classic free hotel breakfast should be. I scooped up scrambled eggs and sausage for Billy. I had some yogurt. It was all I could eat. Billy chatted with Millie about what kind of dinosaurs he hoped to see. She looked at him sadly. He realized this and said, "Why are you so sad, Millie?" A wave of shock came over me again. I'd have to resort to clever maneuvers. He was too clever. I said as rationally as possible, "Won't you be sad to part with Millie when we go home?" "Well, she doesn't want you to go home either," he said in the same reasonable tone as if he were talking to a complete idiot. "Then she should come with us." We both laughed, and Millie leaned over and kissed the top of his head. She replied, "Unfortunately, I live here, but we will always be best friends, even if I'm not with you." There was a sense of loss in her voice. He looked at her again and said in his sweetest voice, "I love you, Millie." Millie began to cry. Mary came downstairs. She said to me, "Maddie is awake and wants to talk to you." I said, "I'll do it as soon as we send Billy over to the dinosaurs. Please tell her to wait there, and I'll be up in a minute." Millie took the hint and said with cheerful energy, "All right, my junior paleontologist, let's go. The dinosaurs haven't had breakfast yet, and if we keep them waiting too long, they might eat you." Billy squealed and took her hand as they headed for the exit. He began to swing playfully on her arm, the way children do when they hold on to a trusted adult. Millie was laughing now with genuine pleasure. She turned to me, and there was sadness in her eyes again. She said, "Take your time, but remember my words." I promised her I'd do it. Millie and Billy left stage left. I heard the garage door open. At that moment, Mary and Maddie appeared, cautiously descending the stairs. Maddie was still walking unsteadily and looked like she had a monstrous hangover. She was wearing a simple tennis skirt and polo, sockless sneaker shoes. She was clearly scared. She was beautiful. Even after the night she had just been through. She had a little makeup on her eyes and lips. Her hair was neatly tucked away from her face in a ponytail. She didn't even look at me. She walked silently to the sideboard and picked up a black coffee. She sat down across from me, continuing to look down. Mary was sitting next to her. She had obviously told Maddie about what we had witnessed the night before. For a few heartbeats there was silence in the room. Finally, Maddie looked up at me. You could see the utter devastation in them. I looked at her sadly and said, "Maddie, I love you with all my heart, and there will never be another woman in my life. But there's no way I can trust you after what I saw and heard last night." She wailed, "What? No, you promised." I continued, "Billy loves you. He thinks of you as his mother. It will kill him when I come home without you. I only pray that you have the human compassion to cooperate with me and do whatever it takes to keep it from destroying him. As much as it kills me, I will work with you for his good. I can't help being stupid, but I won't let my gullibility affect my little boy. Fool me once, shame on you later. But there's no further down that road. I can't put Billy at risk again." Maddie cried, "No." Then she put her head down on her crossed arms and sobbed with frank despair. She was like a little child whose heart was completely broken. She was so obviously suffering that I wanted to hug her and comfort her. After all, I loved her like my own life. She lifted her head and looked at me pleadingly. Tears were streaming down her flawless cheekbones and the mascara she'd applied. Mary told me what happened. I wish I could explain it, but I don't remember anything. You have to believe me when I say I just don't remember anything. The last thing I distinctly remember is your father dragging you off to the library. Then Bitsy handed me a glass of champagne. I told her I wasn't going to drink while pregnant. She mocked me and told me one drink wouldn't hurt. My friends all joined in. They said they just wanted to toast the happy couple. I took a couple sips for appearance's sake. The next thing I knew, I was dizzy and about to pass out. That was the last thing I remembered. I woke up in bed this morning feeling like I'd been run over by a truck. I know someone touched me last night. Mary says it was Chad Smithson. That makes the situation even worse. I'm sure they've already told you what he did to me in college. It scares me to even be in the same room with him." She said, "Bill, I love you and only you. I have no idea why I was with that man. You have no idea how much I hated and feared him. If I was going to cheat on you, he'd be the last person on earth I'd do it with. The only explanation I can offer is that what I was given completely erased my memory and removed all my inhibitions. What you saw was a pure animal reaction. It was not a conscious reaction. You and Billy mean everything to me." She looked at me pleadingly. "You have to believe I would never let that evil son of a bitch touch me." I said, "You're obviously going to defend yourself with drugs. And maybe that's true. I don't know about that sort of thing. But my guess is that whatever drug you were given is probably already out of your system, so we'll never be able to find out." She looked at me as if the noose was around her neck, and I had just pulled the gallows lever. I quickly added, "But fortunately, I have a videotape." Maddie and Mary looked at me in amazement. I lowered my head in embarrassment and mumbled something apologetic like, "I didn't have the energy to listen to it last night." "So now we're going to find out exactly what happened." And I pressed the play button on the iPad I had placed on the table between us. When I connected to Chad's phone, I copied the souvenir he made of his pas de deux with Maddie. That's exactly what I sent to his wife. The clip started a few seconds after that very moment. He must have pulled out his phone when he hit bottom, and then filmed the rest of their little date, holding it in his hand. In the first few seconds, there were extended sighs and moans. Everything was visible. Maddie groaned and reached for the clipboard to turn it off. Mary gently took her hand. She shook her head. Like me, she knew we had to get everything on the table. The cinematography was surprisingly good considering what he was doing with it at the same time. It was obviously a trophy night, not an evening for personal enjoyment. He focused on the photograph. The focus shifted to Maddie's face. She was in a state of extreme lust. Her head was thrown back. She was lost in a frenzy of sensation and unbridled release. Maddie is a white-hot flame, and when her buttons are pushed, the result is inevitable, which is what we witnessed. "I froze the picture," I said. "At that moment, I left the scene. I witnessed everything we've seen so far in the flesh." Maddie blushed with shame. I added, "Up until now your story could have been true, but I've never seen the video, and after that, something really incriminating could come out. Are you strong enough to hear the rest of it?" Given the stakes, I wasn't sure that was the case. She nodded quickly and fatalistically. She seemed to have just bet her entire happiness on one roll of the dice. I pressed play again. Then we heard Maddie's voice pleading loudly, "Oh my God, I'm yours. I'll always be yours." Then came the sound of a loud ending to this scene. There was a short silence that was filled with gasps. Then there was some movement as her lover finally wrapped things up, still holding the phone. He chuckled, hearing her reaction. Then he stood up and muttered something like, "You won't remember this, but I'll always know how much you enjoyed it." A mask of horror froze on Maddie's face as she sat at the table. My selfish feeling was joy. She was stupefied. We could hear him picking himself up, and the picture twitched madly as he did so. Then he staggered down the path, wobbling like he'd just had a couple rounds with Iron Mike Tyson. I knew from experience that fighting with Maddie could have that effect on you. He focused on her again for the final shot. She was lying in exactly the same position we had met her in, unconscious. When the clip ended, he chuckled, perfectly pleased with himself. I solemnly promised that I would use every trick in the hacker's handbook to turn his miserable life into utter crap. Most importantly, we all realized what those last few seconds meant. Maddie thought she was doing it with me. It is a fact that the Titanic sent an SOS signal by radio for the first time. The operator transmitted the message until the very end. He did not want to die without letting the world know what had happened. The last few seconds were just as hopeless. Like the Titanic, disaster struck Maddie's consciousness, but her subconscious was still active, and it was still able to longingly transmit her thoughts. It was obvious that this wasn't some clever ruse to cover up her cheating. In the state Maddie was in, there was no way she could have been that insidious. First of all, she was almost unconscious. Secondly, she obviously didn't know she was being filmed. And finally, there was no one there to hear her except the piece of shit that was with her. Luckily, the dumbass wrote it all down. And that tape was irrefutable proof that she hadn't betrayed me. To say Maddie and I were relieved is an understatement. She looked as if the governor had called for a reprieve, just as the executioner reached for the switch. And I felt as if the 5-point hurricane had been followed by a bright sky. So much relief had not been written on two faces probably since the end of World War II. Then, as scripted, the perpetrators went in for breakfast. They must have both heard what I had just played. Both of them had thunderous looks. Mary cast an indignant glance at them. There was steel in her voice. "Mom and Dad, we need to talk." The mother looked defiant. She said, "You don't tell me what I should do, young lady." Maddie looked at her mother with absolute contempt and said, "Sit down, Mom." Her mother noticed the look. It was pure, unconcealed hatred. Her father read it. He took his wife by the hand and sat her down at the table. He said, "You knew we would have to discuss this sooner or later, my dear." Maddie's mom sat there with a defiant look. I thought, Maddie got her brains from her daddy, not her mommy. I looked at her father and said, "You know who I am now and what I do, don't you?" Her father said, "Walter brought me up to speed after you left. You should have told me." I said, "It wasn't really any of your business, but I may make you my business, depending on what happens next." Her mother snorted angrily and said, "Is that a threat, young man?" Her father surprised us all. He said sternly, "For once in your life, Martha, shut up." I said it in my gentlest tone. "I just need to know why you did it. You owe us that." He looked a little embarrassed and said, "Until our conversation with Walter, we didn't think you were good enough for our daughter. You have to understand what it looked like for us. No education and no apparent career. You just didn't fit. Parents protect their child. You would do the same for your son, right? So, yes, we conspired with a few of Maddie's friends to set her up with someone we thought would be a better fit. At our request, some of her friends contacted her ex-boyfriend Chad Smithson, and he flew down here from Omaha in a flash to try to talk her out of marrying you. They grew up with each other. He comes from a good family. He has an MBA from Harvard, and he has a very promising career. He never understood why he and Maddie broke up. He told us he's always loved her and would do anything to get another chance. He wants to marry her." I asked conversationally. Did he say how his real wife would feel about it? Both of her parents said, "Chad got married?" I softly replied, "Probably not for long," and pressed play again. While I was connected to Chad's phone, I recorded the last conversation. A very angry female voice said, "You're a total bastard. You're not on a last-second business trip. Someone just sent me a video of you with that stupid Maddie Wilson. I didn't pay attention to your cheating because I had no concrete proof. Needless to say, I'm going to use this video to rip you off for all you're worth. Anita, it's not what you think. I couldn't help myself. You know what she was like at Harvard. She picked on me. She wouldn't leave me alone. I'm only human. It was just an evening. I love you and only you." He had maxed out the delirium meter. That's why he stopped. She ended the conversation by saying, "And don't you dare come home. I'll get a restraining order before you get back." I said conversationally, "Since the last thing I did last night was add old man Chad to TSA's no-fly and caps too, getting home may take a little longer than they anticipated." The image of this scraggly piece of shit coming back to Omaha on the Greyhound made me smile. Maddie's parents looked stunned. Maddie wailed. Anita was a sorority sister. Honestly, it seemed a little out of place to me. But that said, Maddie's mind was a complete mess at that point. They had put her through hell, and now she had to listen to this. Her mother was staring straight ahead. She looked like she'd just had a lobotomy. The woman's eyes reflected confusion. Apparently, the certainty of her overprivileged life was not as absolute as it had been a few minutes ago. I turned to her father, who was apparently the only parent in possession of his feelings. I said, "Did you know in advance that he would use the pot to use it again?" Both of her parents said, "He took advantage of her?" Their voices were far from shocked. Then both of them added, almost in unison, "Again?" Mary said, with utter contempt in her voice. "He's always been a predator. Everyone knows that. He's been using Maddie since college. That's why she was so afraid of him. Last night, you two just served her up on a platter to be drugged again and used. I am ashamed and embarrassed to be your daughter," Maddie's mother repeated in a ghostly voice. "He took advantage of her? Oh my God, he took advantage of her?" Her father put his arm around her shoulders and said, "Come on, Martha. We'll get you something. You need to lie down." Then he turned to me and said, We need to talk some more. I said, "What's all this? We need to talk nonsense. I'm leaving for Washington as soon as Billy gets back. I hope Maddie will agree to go with me. It was traumatic for me, and worse for her. We don't need either of you. Maddie will forgive you someday. After all, she is your daughter. But I'll never forgive. And if I were you, I'd be careful about my online presence from now on." Then I turned to Mary and said, "Of course, since you and Millie are honorary aunts, we want you both to be around our 6 future children as often as possible." She gave me the most loving smile. My Maddie, the love of my life, was given to a predator because her snobby parents didn't think I was good enough for her? Screw them. I turned to her father and added, "I have nothing to say to you, and you absolutely have nothing to say to us. If it weren't for the fact that your right type is also a pervert and wrote down his little souvenir, I'd never have proof that I could trust Maddie. And I would walk away from the best thing that could have happened to me in 10 lifetimes. No amount of talking will help you forget this. You tried to ruin my life, and through your fault, your daughter has been subjected to it in the most horrible way. Now you know who I am, and I can assure you that you will regret it yet." I really wasn't going to carry out that threat, but it told me that I had gone too far. So I took a step back, turned, and walked out onto the terrace in a burst of anger. Maddie hurried out and gingerly stood in front of me. She put her hands on my shoulders as I gasped with rage. She looked at me solemnly with her beautiful, intelligent eyes. They looked deep into my soul. Then she lifted up on her tiptoes, gave me the sweetest, most innocent kiss, and timidly said, "We're good, aren't we?" It was a simple question that hid a whole world of hope and suffering. I thought I'd lost her. And if it hadn't been for Chad's accidental desire to have something to remember her by, we would have gone our separate ways. In one day, I went from blessed, through broken, to grateful. It was as close to falling into the abyss as one can get. I said with boundless relief, "We'll always be okay, as long as it never ends. I promise I'll never stop loving you." On the other hand, as a result of the past 12 hours, I felt there was a sea change in our relationship, and maybe that was a good thing for us. I always thought Maddie was too good for me. In the end, that insecurity ruined our relationship. Married people should be, as the Bible says, bound equally. And so far, Maddie had always been the dominant one. All the leverage was in her hands, and deep down, she knew it. However, after seeing her with Chad, I was fully prepared to pick up Billy and leave. I resigned myself to the fact that it was over between us and mentally moved on. She realized that I had made a commitment to leave and was determined to do so. And it was killing her. It strengthened my hand immeasurably. It would be agonizing if I had to leave her in the future. But it was always a viable option that I knew I could accept. And Maddie knew that too. In my opinion, this newfound strength only brought us closer together. We were now on a more equal footing. I also think the events of the last 24 hours have opened Maddie's eyes and increased her respect for me as a potential life partner. In every way, Maddie is a traditional honors student. She has all the pedigree and credentials of a college, but it was my unconventional black art that saved the day. And the knowledge of my underground friends and associates made her father gasp. More importantly, at this particular moment, our new, closer to equal status was clearly turning her on. I looked into those feline eyes and saw hunger and unrequited lust in them. She wanted the one with the grimace in the worst possible way. I took her hand, turned her to face the patio, and said, "Let's take a little walk." As we walked out onto the lawn, we headed toward a gazebo visible in the distance. She said with trepidation in her voice, "Where are we going?" "I don't want to go back there. Mary said that's where it happened." I said a little more forcefully than I could have, "That's exactly where we're headed. We will return there now to thoroughly exorcise any demons that may haunt the place." Maddie let out a small sob of relief and hugged my arm. She said with her former seriousness, "Now do you understand what I was talking about? Do you see how I grew up and how much pressure I was under all the time? If you do, you'll understand why I want the life we have now. I want it with every fiber of my being. You can consider that selfishness if you want, but I will never risk losing that state of peace and acceptance and companionship and the absolute reward of the many children I will give you. We've gotten stronger by going through this, but I'd rather you take our bond for what it really was, You're a good man, and I respect you too much to hurt you in any way. I've been yours from the moment I saw you sitting in that chair. I will always be yours. I will never betray you willingly." That was something to think about as we walked. I'd always counted on Maddie feeling our deep personal connection, but I'd never understood her motives. After spending a weekend with Dr. and Mrs. Dr. Machiavelli and being introduced to the most shallow and mean-spirited set of friends a girl could ever dream of, I understood why she wanted to get out of this quagmire of despondency. And I realized for the first time why she was jealous of me and not the other way around. Not many people have friends who could get you into a situation like the one Maddie was in. Worse, they did it on behalf of a man who most of them knew had committed an unpardonable crime. The old adage, "with friends like these," definitely applies here as well. Maddie and her sisters are sincere, loving people with a strong sense of self-worth and a desire to do the right thing. They all adore children, which speaks to their kind and caring nature. More importantly, they have unselfishly and without hesitation supported each other in all our troubles. I still remember Millie on her knees begging me not to throw Maddie away. Considering that she was also 3 or 4 levels above me, her willingness to humble herself for her sister's sake spoke volumes about what kind of person she was. I didn't need to be a more astute nerd than I am to realize that Maddie is the woman I always thought she was: kind, generous, and completely devoted to her family. The easy rapport and friendship that has been a hallmark of our relationship since we met is something that is inherent in couples who have been married for a long time. You can't learn it. It's in you from the beginning. That is, if you choose the right partner. That she was also the most beautiful woman in all of DC was exactly what you'd expect from a woman whose soul burned bright with Maddie's fire. And now, I was sure that all that fire was dedicated to me. I looked at her as we walked down the fateful path to the scene of yesterday's crime. I could almost understand what motivated that bastard to do what he did. Maddie's a walking wet dream. Her face could be called simply gorgeous. Perfectly proportioned dark features, huge eyes, and a full-wide sensual mouth. She's below average height, but she's also very full. However, it is her general aura of happiness, her spirit with an unquenchable need to love and be loved. This is what sets her apart and captivates me. Everyone sees it. I remember the reaction of my neighbors the first day Maddie and I were together. Maddie interacted with me as if we had been married for years, which caused some confusion for Tom and Nancy since they had never seen me with a woman before. It was sort of a, "Where have you been hiding your wife?" kind of thing. We reached the gazebo. She was scared. I could see it in her eyes. I said, "We're going to erase all traces of last night from this space with an explosion of a real marital moment." She looked terrified. She said, "I was lying on that couch. I saw it on the video, but I don't remember." I looked into her huge, wide-set cat eyes and saw that she was both upset at the thought of what had happened there and craving unbridled jungle fun with me right now. I hissed at her and turned her to face me. I kissed her gently. I was a foot taller than she was, and she had to stand on tiptoe to do it. But she kissed me back with simple tenderness and affection, as a wife should. And then she was overcome with desire. It was as if she had been struck by lightning. Her small, hard body tensed. She had one hand behind my head and the other wrapped around my neck, letting out light sighs. Then she groaned loudly and literally climbed on top of me like a pole. She high-fived me, throwing her head back and wrapping her arms tightly around my neck. She wriggled frantically while nestled in front of me and hugging me like a spider monkey. The whole thing was both an indescribable comedy and the coolest thing I'd ever experienced. I walked us both to the couch. Her head was still thrown back, her arms around my neck, almost strangling me, and she persisted with her mantra, "Do it to me." I sat her down on the couch. Her legs were still wrapped around me. I knew I wouldn't be able to talk some sense into her. She was so out of control that she was clearly in a world of her own. Still, I couldn't clear the deck until I got her to stop pouncing on me like a distraught terrier. I pushed her back onto the couch. Then she lifted one hand to cover her eyes, just like last night. The image of Chad, in exactly the same pose, flashed through my mind. Anger overwhelmed me, and I stopped all participation for a while. Maddie was so consumed with her desire that she didn't even notice what had happened. Her mouth was open in an O shape. I couldn't see her eyes, which were under her arm. Chad had been here with her for a full 15 minutes and hadn't gotten that reaction. She opened her eyes and hissed, "You have to do it! Do it now!" She was at the mercy of an overwhelming lust, so much so that her voice grew deeper. At that moment, she almost looked like one of the demons from the anime. I got the old Lucifer. It was as hard as molybdenum and looked like the Empire State Building. Maddie would have done it with any man, but in this case, her exclusive need for me was something special. I pushed into the center of an active volcano. It was so hot inside that I almost burned myself. Its walls shook. She let out a loud snort that could be heard throughout the house. She screamed, "I love you!" All of this was said in a tone as if she was at Churchill Downs. It was the Kentucky Derby, and she was cheering the horse she had just bet on all the way to the finish line. I've been spending all my energy. All the while, only a very liquid squelching sounded. It was like she was doing a hula dance that made me spin in a 360-degree arc in her. I looked at her beautiful face. It was lost in passion, her mouth wide open and her eyes rolled back. This last vision had done its work, and I was completely unconscious. I heard myself let out a low growl, and then it became more like a scene from Animal Planet. I grunted like a wild boar, she squealed with outright passion. It wasn't so much an enjoyable evening as it was a cage fight. I apologize for interrupting my listening, but I will say right off the bat that this scene is not complete. I couldn't take it anymore and finished what I started. Finished isn't quite the right word. It felt different. It was a delightful sensation, maximum pain and supreme pleasure in one moment. It took me a very long time to regain my awareness. She was passed out, lying on her back, breathing like a sprinter. Her arms were at her sides. Her feet were on the floor. She looked like no woman since Eve. It was almost the same pose I saw her in last night when we came to get her. Jealousy and anger flared and subsided. She slowly opened her eyes. She looked panic-stricken. I said with all the tenderness and love I could muster, "Welcome back, my love." There were many meanings in this statement, and all of them were sincere. She smiled wistfully and said, "I adore you." I've never done that in my life. Maybe it was the fear of your loss and the horror of last night, but it was over the top. I felt like all the insides were being squeezed out of me. I continued to lean on my knees. The intense heat coming from her woke up the old Lucifer. The second round was in full swing. The sluggish Maddie was instantly replaced by my energetic partner. She slapped my arm and said, "Get off. We have to get back to the house before Billy gets back to straighten things out. I don't want him to even suspect what happened. And thanks to you, I have a hell of a lot of cleaning to do." She began to gather her closet. I laughed, getting up and zipping up my zipper. The Maddie I knew was back. We were back together and enthusiastic, and all the evil spirits of the past preppies were banished from this world. We entered the lounge area through the patio. Thank goodness it was only Mary sitting there. We both looked so well refreshed that I'm sure her parents would have flogged us. I had the physically exhausted look of someone who had been through a brisk workout with a Marine sergeant. Maddie's beautiful thick hair looked like she'd put it through a wind tunnel. Her bra was so thoroughly ruined. I didn't even want to think about why that was. Mary looked delighted. She said with a slight sneer, "Well, I see you two have it all worked out." Maddie walked over to Mary and kissed her gently on the cheek. She said simply, "Thank you." Mary wept. Maddie said, "We have overcome our present misfortune, and there will never be anything to keep us apart again. We're going to the courthouse to get married, and we want you and Millie to come with us." It was news to me, welcome news, but news nonetheless. But I am a well-trained man. I know who holds the script. Maddie added, "I'm sorry, but please don't tell my mother or father. Someday I will forgive them, but right now the wounds are too deep." That's when Billy and Millie showed up. Mary must have called her to let her know it was all clear. Billy was beyond excited. In a plastic bag, he clutched half a museum of souvenir fossils. He said excitedly, "Millie bought them for me. I can build my own collection." I thought, seriously, a handler? How old is this kid? Millie walked over to me and kissed me lightly on the cheek. She said, "This means everything to me." I took her by both hands and said, "You were a rock. I can never repay you." It was Millie's turn to clam up. Maddie was back in her usual upbeat mood. She said, "You all need to get dressed. We have a wedding to attend." I was afraid Millie's scream of delight would get their parents' attention, but apparently Martha was out somewhere, and Bud must have been riding around the grounds, or one of the maids, or whatever the lord of the manor does in his spare time. Maddie went upstairs with Billy. I went upstairs with them. Of course, I was immediately banished from the bride's room. She said it was bad luck. I thought, God, how much worse could our luck get? But I didn't want to tempt fate. I was sitting downstairs, reading and drinking tea, when Maddie came downstairs to see Billy. I dropped my cup in surprise. She was wearing a simple vintage Laura Ashley dress. It was pure white linen, with a low neck in the front, and it said, "My wedding dress" on it. The shoes were taupe-colored with a 4-inch heel, and she did her best to make women look exceptional. Maddie's beauty is a scientific fact. There is a mathematical concept called the golden ratio, which is the proportional arrangement of things perceived as beauty by humans. Mattie's face is exactly in that proportion, 1.618 or phi, and it's hypnotizing. I couldn't stop looking at her, but I pulled away from that beautiful face as soon as I saw who she was leading by the hand up the stairs. It was a little boy in a child's morning dress. He looked as proud as he could possibly be. Since it had obviously been made for Billy, it must have been their little secret. She looked at me slyly and said, "I needed someone to give me away, and you needed a best man." We were driven to downtown Ann Arbor in a big black Suburban, not unlike the ones I see the president in Washington. Millie was wearing a pure silk dress with a floral print, at once simple and screaming of expensive. Mary was wearing one of her usual business dresses. She is a partner in a CPA firm. Her outfit was stylish and at the same time incredibly sexy. The ceremony was officiated by a judge who, of course, was familiar with Dr. Bud and Dr. Martha. Maddie nonchalantly explained that they wouldn't be able to make it to the ceremony. The judge looked skeptical. Maddie looked like a lawyer. The judge conducted the ceremony. The moment he got to the point of asking, "Who gives to this woman?" a small voice beside her said firmly and adamantly, "I." When the judge asked for a ring, my best man of 4 years, who had now moved to stand next to me, pulled out a shiny ring I had made especially for my new wife. She's never seen him. Billy and I can keep secrets too. It was a flawless blue Ceylon sapphire with 5-carat diamonds between 2-carat diamonds on a white gold ring. After spending a lot of money on it, I realized that the next few generations will be wearing it at their weddings. When I put it on her finger, it shone like a supernova star. She gasped in surprise. 2 bridesmaids had broken protocol to invite her to watch. The judge did his part by pronouncing us husband and wife. Then he stomped off to his office. I guessed he was going to call old Bud. 2 enthusiastic women crowded around the bride. Then Maddie threw herself into my arms, hugged that tight little body with the big soft breasts, and said with authority in her voice, "You may kiss the bride." Did I mention she was bossy? And now, my dear viewer, the epilogue. It was induction week. Billy stood among the unwavering ranks of midshipmen dressed in white. As a battalion commander, he stood in front of his battalion in formation. He had already qualified for the forward strike line of naval aviation. Today, he was scheduled to go on duty at NAS Pensacola. Only Maddie gave our son the confidence to become an aircraft carrier pilot. She stood beside me, my perfect spouse, and looked at him proudly. She raised the little flawed boy into the outstanding specimen of all-American masculinity that stands before us. She also managed to transform a lonely 34-year-old nerd into a 52-year-old man of some influence and wealth. My exquisite Chelsea stood beside me and cried silently. She was crying tears of joy. She and Billy had always had a special bond. Maddie had created it. I didn't think any woman could eclipse Maddie in feminine beauty, but my beautiful Chelsea did. But Chelsea is going to MIT rather than heading off to read classics at her mother's alma mater. Apparently, gorgeous 18-year-old girls with Chelsea's such formidable talents in math and theoretical calculus are pretty rare. I'd like to think she got some of those skills from me, but her mom is a smartass. The rest of my kids were standing next to Maddie, holding little signs congratulating Billy. There was a perfect 2 years difference between them. They were both as bright and well-mannered as one would expect from any product of Maddie's motherhood. 16-year-old Janie is an athlete. She is already above average height, just like her Aunt Mary. She has just been named to the ODP National Women's Youth Soccer Team. Where Chelsea has the extreme beauty of Maddie, Janie is more like the goddess Athena. She has a natural, almost aesthetic beauty that radiates health and athleticism. She's interested in boys, but she's much more interested in being a female Olympian. Long-haired 14-year-old Tom is the one I'm claiming. He's the one who mastered my black arts. Only he did it when he was 10. I knew I had to train him to stay on the other side of the line. It was a smart move on my part, because he had already surpassed me as a super hacker. But he's the original good guy white hat cyberspace. And I'm sure the adults using his skills would probably faint if they found out how old he really is. Millie and her husband were standing on the other side of me. She went into medicine and has been a practicing pediatrician for 10 years. There are other specialties that pay more. But Millie loves children, and they are the ones she wants to help all her life. Her husband is a great guy and a real man. He works for USAID. So Millie has had many opportunities to take care of children in some very interesting places in the third world. They plan to have a brood of their own once Millie has had her fill of saving the world. Mary never married. She made senior partner at Deloitte, but she is definitely not an old maid. Mary seems to like gorgeous and very playful with lots of variety. And with her money, she could choose. The guy standing next to her was some Brazilian stallion about 10 years younger. He might as well have shown up on a leash. I have the perfect friend and life partner. We raise children, live the same life, and spend as much time together as possible visiting interesting places. Maddie still turns heads, especially when we are in Italy, and she's still the best girl in the neighborhood. I didn't have the heart to doubt my luck, but I always wondered what would have happened if I hadn't succumbed to my voyeuristic nature. I know some of you are thinking, how can you go through life with a woman you met that very evening? And I understand. But it's hard to argue with a lifetime's worth of results. There's no moral to this story. Except that every once in a while, a man who doesn't work anywhere like me can get lucky. But if Lady Luck favors you, hold on tight, because the ride could get bumpy. Ladies and gentlemen, what an extraordinary journey we have been on together. And some have been on it before, having joined us on the Patreon. From the dark depths of betrayal and deceit to the triumphant heights of love and redemption, this story has been nothing short of a roller coaster ride. Moving on to the epilogue, we see the characters standing on the threshold of a new chapter shaped by tumultuous events. First of all, let's applaud Maddie, a woman of strength and resilience who, against all odds, became the architect of her own destiny. From the languid depths of a deceptive setup to the radiant glow of wedded bliss, Maddie's journey was one of transformation and empowerment. Our protagonist, once a self-proclaimed, lonely 34-year-old nerd, found himself in a maze of emotions, discovering layers of himself that he never knew he had. The revelation that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that it can heal even the deepest wounds, was the driving force behind this narrative. The supporting actors, from Millie's steadfast sister to Billy, the blossoming naval aviator, brought their own unique nuances to the canvas of this story. Each character, flawed and imperfect, played a crucial role in shaping the fate of our protagonists. The epilogue, in which we witness the joining of two souls in holy matrimony, serves as a testament to the indestructible spirit of love. The ceremony, shrouded in mystery, unfolds with a mixture of emotions, pride, joy, and a hint of melancholy because of the wounds inflicted in the past. The final scene before us is a picture of a growing family, where the children are a symbol of a future born out of resilience and determination. Maddie, who was once the object of deceit, now represents a loving mother and wife. The bonds formed in the crucible of adversity are now the threads that weave the family together. This story is a reminder that the plot of life is unpredictable and often unfolds in ways we least expect. It teaches us that love in its purest form can heal, transform, and create a tapestry of joy, even in the face of despair. So, my dear viewers, as we bid farewell to this fascinating story, may it serve as a beacon of hope and a celebration of the resilience of the human spirit. Until our paths cross again in another story, may your own journeys be filled with love, redemption, and strength to overcome life's challenges. And as always, don't forget to subscribe for more stories of love, mystery, and the unpredictable twists and turns that make life truly amazing. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and stay tuned for more exciting new stories.